But we're just gonna kind of talk about, because the reason I kind of wanted to talk to you is because you're actually one of the few people I know that seems to use Blender in like a somewhat active form,
Sure.
right? Like
Yeah,
I
no,
like
when so in my home studio, I mean, I don't, I've actually managed not to install Maya. So I've delivered 2 or maybe 3 films now without using Maya.
nice,
Um,
genuinely
I,
impressive.
I'm very, I very much like the workflow of Blender and Houdini.
Yeah.
It's just, I can get into, all the logic behind that, but yeah, I mean, whenever you're ready to
Um,
go, we
I'll
can kick it off.
start.
I mean, I don't want to, have to say things, if I don't know if you're recording now or I think it says you are.
I started recording just now, so yeah, we can just we can start talking about it now.
Jumps in.
When Oz gets on, he'll just get on. It's all
Sure.
pretty. It's gonna, because one of the fun things about Zoom is that it actually breaks out all of our feeds when we
Yeah.
record. So
Yeah.
it's actually pretty easy to edit the stuff later on.
Nice.
So you want to start with like your background? I know like we worked together back in the day on PsyOp Film,
Sure.
and you're like, what are you now? You were yeah, I think you were CG suit back then, or like CG
Yeah,
lead or something.
so when I get brought onto studios, I either I'm happy to do at this point I've been freelancing for I'm just actually going to pull up my LinkedIn to answer your question because I need to look. I've been freelancing for 3 years and 8 months at this point. Prior to that, I was the CG supervisor at Mr. X Gotham, where I oversaw the CG on a couple of films,
Mm-hmm.
and then after that, I went right from there into freelancing. But freelancing, I jumped into I freelanced for I took a 3-month gig over at Alchemy. And when I was at Alchemy for those 3 months, I actually was in a VFX supervisor role. I oversaw the second season of High Maintenance, which was awesome. That was like a really fun project to work on. The clients were great. And,
Nice.
but yeah, so I'm the best way to characterize me is that I really enjoy making the stuff that we make. So I'm happy to play, to be in multiple different roles, from leadership all the way down to just the guy on the box.
Nice. That's awesome.
It's nice to be able to set your your supervisor hat aside and just be like, no, this is my job. You're just,
Yeah, sometimes it is. It's like, I guess it's like a little bit, I find that sometimes it's nice to just do the work.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, because that's why we all, really, that's why most of us get into it, is because we enjoy the work.
We all come from that place too. Like we all kind of just sat behind the box, most of us at least. So we're comfortable with that. So we just mentioned this a second ago, but so we want to talk about Blender today because you're one of the few people I know who actually uses it actively. And you just said, so you said that like you've managed to use Blender and Houdini somewhat exclusively without having to jump into Maya.
Yeah.
So how is that? Do you feel like you get like a lot of pressure to stick to Maya, or is it like fairly easy to just stick to Blender and Houdini?
Oh, the whole Blender thing is all psychological, right? It's like there's no real reason why 90% of CG at this point can't be done in Blender. In my experience, there's there's some specialized cases where people like to have certain software, but then you've got your meat and potato CG, which covers a gambit of wide range of things from having to model a small prop and then render and light it and stick it in a scene, right? To texturing something quickly, whatever the case may be. You have this sort of meat and potato CG, and then you have your specialized case. And for the meat and potato CG, like really, in my opinion, there's no reason that you can't use Blender exclusively. And that's what I've managed to do, right? So, my thing is basically like I use Blender for all the meat and potato stuff. And then my workflow, generally speaking, is that I absolutely love and adore Cycles and Eevee. I generally speaking move into Houdini for production, lighting, and rendering. And it's just because I have a very strong belief that Houdini is just vastly superior in lighting and rendering and scene assembly than any other software on the market. I think that probably the most comparable thing is going to be Katana, but the thing that I don't like about Katana is that it's a specific tool, right? That is its sole function. And yes, I generally use Houdini for that sole function, but it is nice when you need it. There's extra functionality there because it is a DCC. Mm-hmm. So, but no, Blender fits into that role fantastically. I also use Blender almost exclusively for any sort of concept or creative work. If someone says to me like, "Hey, I've done this now a couple of times." So on Queen's Gambit, a lot of the look for the chess pieces was originally developed and started in Blender. I actually ran into an interesting situation there where I created a look in Blender that I then could not replicate in Redshift Houdini. It was the most frustrating thing. And that was one of those things where I'm shaking my fist at the computer screen because we paid for this software and it can't do what this free piece of software can do.
Yeah. When you do concept work, so because I do know about so I'm not a CG person exclusively, but I do hear about kind of some general case uses for Blender. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like concept work is something that it supersedes other softwares in? Is it really is Grease Pencil a very superior tool to
it? I mean, there are some of the best, some of the best concept artists, people that I've seen are utilizing Blender to do their work. There's this guy that's actually really well known. I can't remember his name, but he works at ILM, and he basically does most of his concept work in Blender. He's done a lot of prolific concept. I'll see if I can find you a link. Later.
You can screen share. You'll record if you screen share something if you want to show.
Sure.
Something.
This guy is, there's another guy that I actually became friends with online specifically because
of Blender.
Yeah, he's a concept artist that does stuff in Blender, and it's just his work is great. But then there's this other guy that has a lot of tutorials. So look, obviously with the advent of Grease Pencil, that's just a game changer. I can't even name a piece of software that has anywhere close to the functionality that Grease Pencil offers, right? Maybe someone watching this will be able to enlighten me, but I can't. So some of the crazy, amazing things that I've seen people do is, similar to some of this VR stuff that you've seen where, with VR, they get in there and they sculpt with lines, essentially, you draw 3D sculptures by sketching out these lines. You can do that in Blender with Grease Pencil, and it's been amazing. There's some people have some tutorials where this guy basically sketches out a fighter jet in Grease Pencil in 3D, right? Because he just lays out the lines, and then he uses that Grease Pencil 3D/2D drawing to then do storyboards. And it's just here's the thing. So, going back to just your question about the concept and the creative is that I promised myself when you asked me to do this that I wouldn't I try to limit my amount of time bashing Maya. Well, I have very strong.
I have the same problem. Look, I have the same problem because we suffer through so much with these softwares that it's hard not to be frustrated about things, but we have to kind of lean into our better natures.
You're forced to use it. You know, when I first graduated from college, it was like Maya, and I quickly, when I used Maya on Boardwalk Empire, and it broke on me, you know, a couple times with, you know, render layers or whatever, and I remember saying to myself, it shouldn't be this hard. Like, it wasn't that I was doing something incorrectly. It was just that fundamentally, the way that Maya was designed is designed for scene assembly. It just shouldn't be that hard. And you realize that as you start to use other pieces of software. Like, I had the pleasure of going over to SciOp, and when I joined SciOp, they were using Softimage, and instantly you realize, like, oh my God, it doesn't have to be this hard. You know, I've used Modo professionally. I've had to use Lightwave professionally. Softimage, you know, I've had Houdini. You know, you end up, when you start using all these pieces of software, you get to compare and contrast, and you realize that all, you know, these things that you might be frustrated with the industry, you know, Maya is by far the, you know, the industry standard. It's only that way because that's what everybody knows. It's not because it's necessarily the best tool.
Do you feel like is there still something that Maya specifically is still superior at? Like, I heard animation and stuff like that is still pretty solid at, or
character animation would be like anything animation, which, look, makes 110% sense, right? Alias Power Animator then became Maya, right? Like,
true.
Its roots are in animation. So if it's first in class, the best animator on the market, totally makes sense. They've had decades to perfect that part. But going back to the creative, sorry, I'm really good at tangents, so feel free to.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
But going back to the creative, right? Like, Maya, you know, they've over the years taken this ad hoc approach, right? They had this great animator, and then they're like, okay, well, to address the market, we need to add this. You know, we basically need to add more and more features, and sort of stuff gets dumped into Maya, and you get a lot more features, but there's always this feeling of, like, I don't want to say kludginess, but like, it all feels a little slapped together, I guess, would be the best way to put it. At least in my opinion. Again, this is very much subjective. But it would make sense because it wasn't concepted from the ground up to be like that, right? Blender, on the other hand, from the ground up, is the whole concept of it is to be sort of a one-stop shop. So that's like their mission statement. At the core of what they do, it's always interoperability between these different parts of the software. So when it comes to concept or creative, right, you know, one of the things you want to be able to do is to be able to iterate quickly, right? You want to be able to just slap stuff together, throw it together, right? Well, that means that if you want to quickly sculpt something and then render it, you don't have to leave the package, right? At this point, I mean, you know, there's this amazing developer who's added staggering amount of functionality to the sculpting features in Blender. I mean, he inspired.
I was looking at their features page just now. Actually, I'm actually going to share this real quick because I feel like their features page is like really, really good.
Their developer for sculpting, I'm positive, inspired ZBrush to add the cloth sculpting features that you now have in Blender. I mean, it was in Blender first before it was in ZBrush.
We could even like talk about all these things individual, but they have like this is for 2.92 that I guess just came out.
I mean, this guy has just gone to town adding feature after feature after feature. It's really, really, really impressive. Awesome. So, you know, from a creative perspective, you can get in there, you can do a scene layout, you can quickly sculpt something, you can texture it inside the software, and then you really, you know, in my opinion, you have access to one of the best render engines available today, right, for free. So Cycles, one of the reasons that I consider it one of the best render engines on the market is because it was designed from the ground up as CPU, GPU compatible, meaning that your functionality exists the same on the CPU as on the GPU. So when you're working locally and creatively, you can roll on your 3090 or whatever, and that stuff is fast, right? But let's say that you've assembled something that now, although with a 3090 with 24 gigs of VRAM, you're gonna be hard pressed to find a situation that can't handle. But let's say you do invent something that can handle, you're not SOL.
Someone will,
right? You just flip it over to CPU mode, and yeah, maybe it takes a little bit longer, but you now have access to the full system memory, right?
Yeah.
You do that. You try and compare and contrast that with something like Redshift. And Redshift is GPU only, and now they have a functionality where you can utilize the system memory, but in my experience, A, that never works very well, and B, the render time is just a staggering difference. And they even admit to that, right?
Yeah.
So you combine the fact that it's CPU, GPU. And along with all the other functionality that it has, and it's just it's a great render engine. And then they've done something even more fantastic, which is that you have Eevee, which Eevee is like a real-time render engine. It has a lot of features that you would find in like Unreal Engine, but here's the really cool thing: is that Eevee, one of their goals is to make Eevee match cycles. So you can actually adjust your shaders. You can look at stuff in real time in Eevee and then flip over to your ray trace renderer. And with a high level of confidence, you can know that it's going to look very similar.
So what cycles is the added feature of cycles, just that it gives you like more plausible reality versus like Eevee?
I mean, so cycles is going to be full on ray traced, whereas Eevee is more like a game engine, right? They're, for instance, reflections. They're doing screen space reflections where they're just, it's a cheat, right?
Yeah.
Screen space, ambient occlusion, those sort of things that you would find in a game engine. It's all, it's cheats, but it's great because you can sort of see where you're going without paying the cost of jumping over into a ray.
And it is useful in some circumstances. Even the Eevee renders are probably useful. This is something that I just don't know out of my own ignorance. Does something like Eevee, does it render passes?
Yeah. And
okay.
they even just recently added cryptomat support to Eevee.
Nice. Awesome.
So there's a lot of people that render straight out of Eevee. I mean, I'm actually going to pull something up here for you to show you. But yeah, this whole ability to just move through different contexts and work in modeling, work in sculpting, work in shading, work in rendering. It's just your ability to be creative is just fantastic.
Yeah. What do you feel about? So they recently added geometry nodes, right?
Yeah.
Which I guess is kind of their foray into like a more Houdini style kind of approach to things. Is that accurate? Is that like an accurate way to look at it?
Yeah. So you can look at basically you can think of it like this. So geometry nodes are. Sorry, I'm just trying to. My machine is overdue for a
update of sorts.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a little rough right now, so I'm just trying to let me see here. Yeah, okay. So hang on one second. I just want to make sure that what I show is representative. I'm sorry, what was the question?
So geometry nodes, is that kind of, do you think it's like they're trying to foray into kind of a Houdini style of
right, so they
software?
will. So that's sort of their goal is to notify everything. And so I think the best way to think about it would be if you take something like Bifrost, which is an amazing piece of technology. Bifrost sort of started from the simulation side, right? And so they're doing this whole procedural node graph inside of Maya, but from like a simulation side. So you want, Bifrost is mainly geared towards like water sims, that sort of stuff, right? Whereas Blender, they decided they were going to approach it from the opposite direction. So what they decided is that they are going to start working on turning everything into nodes, but they want to start from a procedural component. So for procedural side. So the idea of constructing geometry procedurally. And really this comes up with, one of the best use cases for something like this is going to be like scene layout, right? Like someone comes to you and says, hey, I want a grass field, right? Mm-hmm. Well, there's one, you've got a bunch of grass models and now you want to make a grass field. The easiest way to do that is to scatter some points and start instancing geometry to those points. Right, right now I'm trying not to use the M word. In other softwares that can prove more difficult, right? Softwares that aren't node-based for those sort of tasks.
Right.
So that's really where they started to approach it. There's a fantastic, here, let me see your geometry nodes, demo files. I saw this really, really great, let's see if I can find it. Geometry nodes, Blender, I just saw this. Oh yeah, so check this out. This guy, so you have to imagine, okay, so geometry nodes are relatively new to Blender, right? I mean, right. Like 292 is their first feature release, so they've had, they haven't been around that long, but people are already doing stuff like this. I'm gonna put this into chat for you, and you can share. I think this is a fantastic example of sort of something brilliant and sort of production friendly that you can do, or not production friendly, but like something you might actually find useful.
Is this like
So this is actually a demo file you can download. So again, the
oh, I see.
Yeah,
I see. Let's go now.
So what you see on the right here, this is a UI that he built from the geometry node. So he basically has done this whole node setup behind the scenes, and then this is the user interface that he's decided to present to you, which is amazing.
That's kind of cool. Yeah. So it's like a New York City. Well, New York City. It's like a New England kind of townhome generator.
Yeah, this is the kind of functionality that you find in Houdini with HDAs.
Yeah.
Right? Like this is what you would do with an HDA is you build an intricate node setup under the hood, and then you collect all your variables and attributes, and then you put them into like a container, and that's what you would present to the artist. And you would just say, here, take this, go to town, build a city for us for, project XYZ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Have you played around with geometry nodes? Would you say that it's like, I mean, I imagine Houdini is like much more advanced in that field.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's not real, it's again, I would think of geometry nodes like, it's, comparing it to Houdini it's not really a comparison. It's more like,
it's a good feature to have.
It's a great feature to have, right? It's a great feature to have. It's there are certainly use cases, where it would come in handy. I did a shot on Queen's Gambit, with Blender just because when I work at studios, one of the things I enjoy doing is, always trying to get at least one shot with Blender in, just
out of principle, just kind of
just to do it,
Yeah.
And it was that there was this one shot with it was grass, and I sort of did it the old way you would do with particle systems, and that was cool, but the geometry nodes way would have been so much better.
Right. How do you feel like how is like studio? Do you ever see like studio adoption of Blender anywhere? Like just
Yeah.
from your experience?
Yeah. So all right. So first thing, you've got Tangent Animation. Tangent Animation did Next Gen, which is a Netflix project. It's on Netflix. It's a fully animated film.
Oh, okay. All
That
right.
entire film was done in Blender and rendered in Cycles.
I'm gonna
So,
check that
so,
out.
so Tangent
We're gonna
Animation.
plug this show right now. Next Gen. Everyone look
Yeah,
at
no,
it.
it's well done. And you know what they did is they decided that they didn't want to be locked into a black box a third party application. And we can talk about the benefits to that, but uh and so they basically almost exclusively use Blender. I will say though that from what I understand, I don't know anybody at the company, but they also use my preferred pipeline, which is Blender and Houdini. They're actually in the process right now of turning Cycles into a Hydra based renderer so that they can use Cycles inside of Houdini.
Oh.
And all of that's open source. So sometime here in the future, you might have a fantastic ray tracer that you can utilize inside of Houdini with Solaris for free,
Nice.
right?
Yeah,
I don't like
awesome
to emphasize the free part because, really at a studio, software costs are the least,
Yeah.
are the smallest thing. But it does make a difference, I think, with rendering because when you talk about rendering, you want to, distribute tasks as much as
me and Oz were talking about this, like about Fusion, how it's not so much like it's not the number and like the money is not the issue. It's just that when you're in a project, when something is low cost or free, it makes it a lot easier to kind of scale. It just makes it a lot easier to solve big problems quickly.
Yeah.
And that matters because we run into a lot of big problems all the time.
Yeah, like if all of a sudden you run into a problem that the only way is to render that character with subsurface scattering, and that subsurface scattering now pushes up your render time to 10 times what it was, and now you just have this brute force option that you need to push through. It makes a huge difference when you don't have licensing costs, when now you're just worrying about paying for time on the Amazon cloud.
Right, exactly.
Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
We were talking about like studio adoption of, and you were talking about Tangent and how Next Gen is something that everyone needs to watch. It's like a kids movie, right?
Yeah,
probably something like that.
Yeah, it's a kids movie. So yeah, and on that note, I don't want to I can't really say a lot, but I think I have it on. You're gonna see wider adoption of Blender, and the reason.
That was actually going to be my next question. Is like Blender. I mean, Blender's been around for a long time, but it seems like in the last few years, maybe it has to do with like the Academy Software Foundation or something like that. It's kind of exploded. I mean, I know that they like expanded their office in the Netherlands, I believe.
Yeah, they moved into a whole new location.
Yeah, they staffed up more. Like it seems like in the last few years, they've gotten more influx of donation and funding.
Yep, and I'll show you exactly why you're going to see, because, well, for one thing, Blender pairs very well with Unreal, which is something that's being used in virtual production, something that is for a lot of people free, right? Again, you're looking at you're basically looking at a shift in how software gets paid to be developed, right? Like it does, how much sense it makes anymore to, maybe it always makes sense to to purchase software, but most software companies have moved away from actually buying, permanent licenses to subscription models, because what everyone's realized is that software is a living, breathing thing, and it's a monster that constantly has to be fed. And perpetual licenses don't do that.
Right.
That's
very true.
Let me show you. Let me see if I share my screen. Yeah. Oh, I don't think I can share. I just tried to share my screen.
Oh, do I have to give you permission or something? I'm not. Zoom. I know some softwares, but Zoom is not one of them. Allow, how do I do that? I'll make you a host. You want to be in charge?
Oh,
There you go. You have all the power now.
oh boy.
There you go.
Well, let's see here. Okay. All right. So this is what I wanted to show. So this is why you're going to see, is that showing up?
Yes.
Okay. So this is why you're going to see wider adoption of Blender. First of all, so 2 years ago, not even, like, this number was, I think it was somewhere around 30, right? Like, over the last year and a half, they've gone, they're up,
like 500% increase.
Yeah, yeah. This is a monthly contribution. So, yeah. So there's your first signifier, and why that matters is because now, they can hire full-time developers, which is what they've done. Their full-time development team is somewhere around 20 people. What is that?
That's right. It's going to be mostly VFX people that are going to watch this. Yeah. So if there's like some terminal that like flashes, no one's going to be perturbed.
But here's the other reason why you're going to see widespread more adoption, right? Like, these are your patrons. So AWS, for instance, they just donated, they invested in Blender, donated to Blender a boatload of money to bring the character animation tools into a better place. Mm-hmm. I would imagine I have no idea about any of the inner workings of that conversation, but I bet it was something like, we want feature parity with Maya.
Yeah, exactly. It's probably just like, here's our list of stuff that we want. Yeah. It probably sounds very familiar. Yeah. And you will receive X amount of money.
We're not suggesting that you copy anybody, but this is what we'd like, right? Epic gave them like $3 million over spread over a couple of years, so they're a mega grants recipient. Unity is investing in. AMD is not only providing financial support, but they've also submitted they supply developer time.
Yeah. I'm kind of surprised that Unity and Epic are, well, because I guess they get to benefit from their progress as much as anybody, right?
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So if you make the bar, Blender does not do what Epic does, and does not do what Unreal does, and it doesn't do what Unity does. Blender about 5, maybe not 5 years, I don't know how many years ago, they did have a game engine inside of Blender. They dumped it. They basically came to the conclusion that Unity and Unreal, they were never going to be able to offer anything close to that, and Unity and Unreal don't charge you unless you start to make money. So they were like, that sort of with their mission.
The market is saturated. There's no reason to.
Yeah, and their whole thing is to sort of spread. They want people to get into media creation, and so, it wasn't really in their best interest. You need to scroll down. I mean, you've got all these places that are contributing to this software. So here's your first thing. Your second thing is, you check out a resource like this. So this is a market like TurboSquid. Fantastic resource. When you decide you want to sell something on their marketplace, you can actually say you want to donate a proceed of every sale to Blender. And so that's what they do. So this is what they've collected this month to donate to the foundation. Mm-hmm. Right? So you look at something like, I don't know if they still show this anymore. But yeah, like, check this out, right? Do the math, right? This guy has sold over 13,600 copies of this at $40 a piece. Let's say $30 a piece, right?
Yeah.
So you've created a marketplace now that supports the software, allows someone to make money and, support their livelihood.
Yeah.
Provide a product for other people. It begins like a something.
Yeah, it's an ecosystem. Yeah, like they're kind of creating an ecosystem for their stuff that keeps making them. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that the incentive is there for people, to make tools. I mean, there's some really great tools for I mean, this right here, I mean, this stuff just blows my mind. It's like magic, right? Like these guys, or these people, like the tool set that they've built for hard surface modeling. You should just like, after this call, just go and look at this. It's just, it's wacky. They, the functionality that they've added is just, and these are the sort of things like if you told me, you said, hey, go find one of the, the pieces of software, one of the other DCC pieces of software that has a marketplace or a community as vibrant as this, I would have no idea where to go. I mean, there's ArtStation. There used to be this website called Simply Maya and Simply Lightwave. I've never found anything on there that's not 10 years old.
So where's Blender today? Where is Blender kind of mostly used? Like, is it like a European thing, or is it
Oh, I think it's all. No, I think it's all over. Yeah, I think I'm gonna stop sharing the screen. I think that it boils down to two places. I think that it's studios that have decided to embrace it, and sort of make it either their main principal piece of software or part of their pipeline. Another example would be one of Ubisoft's studios is fully using Blender to make animated content. So they've sort of gone and gone full steam on that. They've actually created a plugin called Mixer, which they've released to the community for free. And it essentially allows like a team of artists. I don't know if there's a limit to how many, but let's say 15 to collaborate in real time on the same scene. So say, for instance, I came to you and I said like, hey, we need to make a room that is very disheveled, probably like the room I'm standing in right now, all the boxes and crap laying everywhere from just moving, right?
Yeah. I'm going to add that I have the same thing going on. This is all a lie. Everyone watching this video, this is not like my office is a mess right now.
There's a procedural way to do that, right? And you can go in and you can try and scatter things, but really the way that stuff usually looks the best is with a lot of hand placement and a lot of art direction, right?
Yeah.
And so now, as someone I told about this put it, a producer's dream is to parallelize a task, right? And say just throw bodies at it. In that situation, you kind of can, right? If you can have 4 or 5 people working on the same file at the same time in real time.
You do the desk area, you do the office area.
Right. And like you could actually like grab, like say for instance, someone set something on a desk that you liked for, the dresser. You could duplicate it and grab it and put it over on the dresser in real time.
That sounds like a fun, that would be such a fun exercise in VR.
Yeah, right.
Right. If you had like a bunch of artists and like everyone puts on their headsets, all right, we have to decorate this room.
You could probably do that because Blender's adding. It's either added or they're adding VR support to the viewport. So you put on a VR goggles to enable that plugin, and I suggest with some libations, some alcohol.
It's gonna totally. That was actually my next question. Is like, what do you think like the future is like? What's Blender gonna be up to in the future? But I guess, yeah. So I guess you answered like they're gonna do VR support, and studio environments are gonna change drastically because everyone's gonna be in like this empty box room, and everyone's just gonna work virtually.
Pretty much. I mean, it's sort of one of those things where there's a never-ending list of things to do.
For sure.
They announced, right, like for their 10-year anniversary of Cycles, which is their render engine, they're actually going to, I guess, essentially redo it, which is another thing that I really like, really like about a software that's developed by people that love software and not being controlled by executives who are interested in the bottom line, which is that what you will see with Blender from time to time is they will just literally go in and rip out chunks.
Just redo it.
Just redo it. Like when they rolled over to the 2.8 line, which is what everybody got all excited about because that
they redid the entire interface.
Redid the entire interface. I mean,
completely.
they had major feature regression. There were things that worked better in the previous version of Blender, but they decided like, look, we need to do this. So they went back through and they redid stuff. And yes, there's some growing pains, but ultimately,
it's the right thing to do. Yeah.
I mean, you've seen it. I'm sure you've opened someone's nuke script and gone like,
oh yeah, no, I know what you're talking about is like, I feel like this is something we experience all the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes you open up like a script or you open up a shot or something, and it's just like, whatever made that happen, you just have to redo sometimes things.
Right. Yeah.
It's just the right thing to do. Because you know that in the future, like if you keep going with this, it's going to be 0 hour and things are going to be on fire and it's going to be a really big problem. And you can kind of help yourself in the future a lot by just redoing things. And that's pretty rare in the software world.
Yeah. Yeah. In college, I had a sculpting teacher who I'm terrible at sculpting with clay. I'm
a very impatient sculptor, I learned.
Yeah.
I'm very impatient at sculpting.
I just am not like, I don't know, not my jam. But I was there and I was like trying to do the head, and it was looking like really, really like effed up, like worse than like Picasso type stuff. And she walked by and I was like, oh, I was so frustrated. And she literally grabbed my clay and just like, just smashed it.
There go your dreams.
Yeah.
That's true though. But it is like that though. Cause like she's not married to it. She knows that it's just start over.
Yeah. You can once you have a bad foundation, you can only take it so far. Right. Before you start hitting the limitations of that foundation.
Yeah. That teacher that was a life lesson she was trying to impart, not like a.
It was exactly a life lesson. Applies to so many things.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's pretty much it. I feel like we just talked about. I feel like we just went through the entire gamut of like Blender's kind of life cycle and everything they've done. Is there anything else? I mean, what else is like?
Well, I mean, one of the big things that I wanted to also say is that, everyone that knows me, they know that I talk about Blender a lot. They probably think I eat, sleep, and dream about Blender. But really, the truth is that like, up until I started doing work from home, I actually very rarely got to use Blender professionally. And, I have 2 kids, and when you're not using something professionally, you're barely not using it because I don't have free time to do anything personal work. My sort of, my enthusiasm for Blender comes from really 2 points. One being, it's a piece of software that I actually really enjoy using. Like, things just work, right? It just, I don't really how to explain it. I personally just enjoy using. I guess
there's something inherently about it that just clicks.
Right, again, I don't want to really compare it, but if you compare it to Maya, which is the sort of an industry standard, one thing that's always bugged me about Maya, like 100%, is the only way up until 2022, when they've now released USD support, the only way to organize your scene was to parent objects under empty transforms.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, that was the only way to organize your outliner, and you're like, well, that's weird. Why am I?
It seems like a Band-Aid kind of.
Why am I organizing my objects in my outliner under empty transforms? But yes, it gives me the functionality of like being able to parent stuff and move it together. But what if you don't want to do that? What if you just really want to just organize your scene?
Just visually,
Then you've got your objects underneath these empty transforms, which then can be moved. Well, what if you don't want those objects moved? So then you have to lock all the attributes on that empty transform. It starts to get into this weird world where it's like it was never really thought of as a way. It shouldn't be a way to organize your scene, but that's what people use because that was the easiest way to organize your scene.
Yeah.
Compare that with something like Blender, where they've literally provided a mechanism that is completely separate from hierarchy, just for scene organization and management.
Yeah.
Right?
It's
So
just a layer of abstraction.
you have that similar functionality in Clarice. You get similar functionality now with USD. It's just, so those are the kinds of things that really, when I would use it, that's what sort of drove me in this direction. And now I just get excited about using it because I think it's fun. The other part that, I always get jazzed about it is that I think that their business model, the way that they've managed to basically pay people to support their, these people literally support their families with the money they make off an open source project. I think that it's hard to put into words how incredible I feel like it is, because
it's just a great accomplishment.
It's a fantastic. I mean, point to another piece of software or point to anything that really is successfally does this day in and day out. There's not that many organizations. You have nonprofits, but like in the software world, in our world, I mean, come on.
Yeah.
So I think that what they've been able to accomplish is just incredible. And so that just compounds my interest in the software. So that said, I'm not a super loyal person when it comes to software. If I find something that makes my life easier, right? Something that I enjoy using more.
That's like what you were saying. We're all busy, like we all don't have the time anymore. We're not in college. Like we kind of.
Yeah, I want to reach the result that everybody wants in the shortest amount of time. And how can I do that, right? With the least amount of headaches, because I know what I'm doing. A lot of times I either run into a limitation of the software or a limitation of the create. There's all sorts of other things. The software shouldn't be one of the barriers. And I more often than not, I find that Blender doesn't provide me with many barriers. I don't find that I'm hitting a lot of software walls. I hit other kind of walls, but not software walls.
Yeah, creative walls.
So that was one thing.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Brendan. Maybe one day, like when SIGGRAPH is back, because I know Blender sometimes, what's his name, Tom Rosenthal.
Yeah.
So there's maybe one of these days, if there's a SIGGRAPH where everyone gets together, which I guess the next one. I mean, I think we're kind of, things are starting to normalize. I'm going to try to talk to him as well, because I want to, what you're talking about, I want to ask him, it's how did you do this?
Yeah. Well, their story is crazy. I won't steal their thunder, but the story is crazy, and you can read about it. But the one thing I will say is that Blender was one of the first crowd-funded piece of software, or crowd-funded things. Period. They did crowdfunding before there was GoFundMe or
a platform for it. Yeah.
Let me just show you what we'll get off. But let me just show you this real quick, so I have it up and I didn't get a chance. You can see my screen, right?
Yes, I see it.
Okay, so this is not my work. This is one of the demo files that's available on the.
Oh no! Are you gonna move the screen right now and everything's gonna look amazing?
Yeah. So I have a little bit of an issue with just my machine at the moment. Normally I don't get this. The performance isn't normally this. But yeah, so this is easy.
That's fine. I mean, you should see, I use a thin client. I don't even have a real machine anymore. Yeah, just
Right. So that's easy, right? And so you can imagine, right? Let me see if I can just.
It's so wild, because I remember when I was when I was in college, it's just this, getting something like this was such an incredible amount of work.
Right.
To get something at this level, and now it's real time, and it's I remember having to sneak in my renders onto the render farm at odd hours to get something like this at this quality.
Right? Yeah, no. So you take something like this. So for instance, the hair is represented as legit strands. This is all in Eevee. Right? This is
not, so wild.
That's not geometry. That's strands that you would render. Right. So you see, you can work this way, right? So I can go in here and I can actually grab this edge. You could model.
Yeah.
Looking you know what I mean? So
it's so wild.
They have a representation of depth of field, right? So now you're looking through your camera, you can see depth of field. Then let me just I'm just gonna hide. Let me just hit render. Switch over to your render view. Give it a sec.
Is this render view? Is this like switching over to cycles or switching over to just, yeah?
This is cycle. Oh, my computer is like not okay right now. Probably wasn't
Seems
great.
like a standard computer, just waiting to render stuff.
Let me just check.
I really love their UI improvements.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
just such like they just really did it right. It was so correct.
I'm gonna try that one more time. Oh, you know what? Maybe because of the screen share, it's not liking that.
Oh yeah, that's true. Screen share sometimes, especially with like GPU stuff, it has.
Let me just see if I have. Oh no, I deleted that. Yeah, it doesn't like the screen share.
That's all right.
I was just doing this, but yeah, you can. I mean,
yeah, all of these are available on like their website and like the thing that I showed before. So I think blender.org.
Yep.
Anybody can just check out all their stuff, and it's all very impressive and it's all really cool. Thank you, Brendan, so much.
My pleasure.